The guest today. I'm so excited to be the guest today. Also a little nervous. But
It's going to be great, Shelly.
I want to welcome everyone as the co-host of Everyone's Welcome, but also um, I think you have to be living under a rock to not know that today is the first anniversary of the death of George Floyd. So before we jump in today's conversation, we're going to take a moment to remember him on this first anniversary of his death. We think too of so many others whose absences are felt today and every day. They are not statistics. We think of Dante Wright, a young dad with hopes and dreams, and Breonna Taylor, an emergency room technician with plans to become a nurse. George Floyd was Gianna's dad and a beloved brother, son, and friend. Systemic racism and injustice has fueled countless deaths, and today we honor and remember the blessings of each one that each one of them brought to their families, their friends, communities, and now to the world. May their memories be for blessing and empower each one of us to work for a just and safe world for all people. And on
Amen.
that note, Gabby,
Well,
oh,
Shelly, I want to welcome you and welcome everyone to Everyone's Welcome, a fresh conversation about disability. We have a great conversation planned for today. And this month, we are actually celebrating our 1 year anniversary of Everyone's Welcome. Including today, we've produced a total of 23 programs, which you can see if you go to the jkidaccess.org website. I'll put it in the chat in a little bit. We created Everyone's Welcome to provide the opportunity for our audience to connect, learn, be part of a greater community, bringing together people for conversations around disability, mental health, diversity, and inclusion. Our guests stop by to share their experiences and their stories that provide us with food for thought as well as ways to navigate the world that we're living in. Everyone's Welcome is a wonderful collaboration between Whole Community Inclusion at Jewish Learning Venture and Inclusion Innovations. Everyone's Welcome is captioned, and you can click on the CC icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen to adjust the captioning for your screen. We are recording Everyone's Welcome, and you'll receive the link in an email. And we invite you, of course, to share the recording of this episode with people in your life who will appreciate it. And we invite your questions and comments throughout. We'll get to them at the end, but you can use the chat function at any point to add questions and comments. I should also add that we are sharing this conversation on Facebook Live, and Shelly and I will be, spotlighted or spotlit in the Facebook Live. But just so you know, you can always, if you're more comfortable, turn off your video, but it will only show Shelly and myself. Um, so I know many of you know Shelly, but I'm going to still share a formal introduction to my co-host. Shelly's a leader in the disability and mental health inclusion movement. Much of her work is based in faith and spirituality, where the practices she developed are highly relevant and applicable to DE&I. Shelly's a sought after keynote speaker, trainer, and consultant. She's the author of the groundbreaking book, From Longing to Belonging, a practical guide to including people with disabilities and mental health conditions in your faith community. Shelly recently earned the University of Southern Florida's Muma College of Business Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Workplace certificate. She holds a master's degree in developmental disabilities from St. Mary's University of Minnesota. Shelly's the founder of Inclusion Innovations Consulting and co-founder and organizer of Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month. And just announced, Shelly is the 2021 recipient of the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Religion and Spirituality Network's Reimagining Spirituality Leadership Award. Mazel tov. Congratulations, Shelly. That's such a well-earned honor. And I'm really
Thank
proud to
you.
call Shelly a friend and a mentor to me, as well as my co-host in this endeavor. Shelly's work has inspired my work at Jewish Learning Venture, and this is an exciting conversation today, Shelly. So we're going to jump right in. So
Okay.
this term, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is becoming more common in business, in nonprofit, certainly in faith-based organizations and other organizational segments of society. So, how does your work at the intersection of disability, spirituality, and faith community inclusion inform your perspective on DE&I?
Thanks for the question, Gabby, and right back at you, good friend and colleague and creator of mischief and wonderful initiatives. I I've been in the field for over 20 years now, and most recently, and again because of the death of George Floyd, I think there's been an amplification of the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement. It's been around for a long time. There are a lot of organizations, and one that really comes to mind is Target, who has a DE&I program that's uh, been very effective. It's been cited in a lot of different ways, um, and there's other organizations also focused on it. But we in the faith world, disability, theology, spirituality, mental health, that all those intersections, um, have learned a lot of lessons that in my perspective really can inform any diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. So whether you're from a nonprofit, a corporate entity, um, self-employed, if you're a vendor or a supplier, um, if whatever organization you align with, diversity, equity, and inclusion is very much a part of what we do. So I'm just going to take you a little bit through some of the characteristics and things that we've learned over the years that are really relevant. And of course, this is just Gabby, a very short, small overview of just so much information that I wish I could share, but not today. So one of the key features is to recognize that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And just to call that out, I think a lot of organizations, the faith-based organizations particularly, were like, yeah, we want all people to be included. We want people with disabilities to be here, to be part of our community. Let's have a program, or let's pull together a committee, without really delving deep into why inclusion has been so important, and why why they're not living up to those ideals that are so prevalent in faith communities. Another insight is that DE&I is not about fixing people at all. It is really about supporting people to be their authentic selves, to be genuine, and for the entire organization to really be present, bought in, and participating, not as them and us, but as us. That's a really important feature. So helping people understand within an organization, within a community, that it's up to everyone to be present as we take this journey. And it is a learning journey. I think that's really key. That underrepresented groups of people have been ruled out from participation and inclusion, and most importantly, I think, contribution to an organization, to a faith community, or whatever organization it is, because of diversity. And the cost of rendering people invisible discounts the gifts, the strengths, the contributions, indeed the humanity of an individual. Seeing the person, not their race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, gender, and gender identity, disability, mental health condition, or whatever marginalized othering that happens. Again, is seeing people face to face. My rabbi, Norman Cohen, says that when you look into a person's eyes and you see the spark of the divine there, you won't wonder how to treat that person. You'll know. And that ultimately, whether you're into religion, spirituality, theology, the point is, and if you're not, that's a-okay too, because what it really means is that we all share this common humanity. We're all here for a purpose. We all have something to contribute, ways to belong. So these are just really critical things to know. The what Something else that I've seen, I know this is kind of a long answer to the question, but I really want to bring these essential pieces up because I think it helps frame uh, our conversation today, Gabby. I think that responses to a call for inclusion and diversity are met by adding words such as diversity, inclusion, equity to a mission statement or policy without any backbone to it, without any discussion, participation by the people so affected by discrimination and bias, and doing one-off training or telling people how they should think and act. These have been problematic in the faith-based world, and they are also problematic everywhere else in society. There's no real substance. So one of the big takeaways is there has to be substance, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. There are two foundational concepts that lead to action, and those I've described in my book, From Longing to Belonging. It's why I wrote the book. The first is the structure of inclusion.
I'll be right back.
Okay. The first is the structure of inclusion, and these are not architectural changes necessarily. This is structural changes that include assessing the organization, governance, so policies that are transparent, and active support throughout the organization, and particularly starting with senior leadership. Whatever organization you are, I think it's absolutely critical. Then having a vision and articulating the objectives, collaborating within the organization as well as utilizing outside partners. And this structure of inclusion was where faith communities were sort of grounded for many years. Okay, and everybody said, "Oh, look, we're inclusive. This is great." And yet, people who were on the margins still were seen as the other. They weren't involved. So that brought me in my work and my thinking to something that I've labeled or called the spirit of belonging. And that is at the heart of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's at the heart of community. It's at the heart of being our genuine, authentic selves, all of us. And it means that we're valued, we're listened to, that our contributions are honored and valued and incorporated. It's about dignity and respect and understanding the perspectives of people with lived experiences. So also part of the spirit of belonging is having a safe space to have conversations that are sometimes very difficult or sometimes new. So this is what belonging says. This is what I think belonging says. It's a let people be different and unique and live their differences. And that is what generates a robust and genuine organization, community, world.
Shelly, it was a thorough answer. We don't think of it as long. You just gave us a lot of wisdom. And I want to let you know that some new folks came in while you were sharing. At any point, if you have a question or comment, please put it in the chat. We will turn to questions and comments towards the end of our conversation. So, Shelly, I want to ask you about stereotypes and biases, which can often contribute to marginalization of individuals as well as to groups of people. How does how does this play out, and what can organizations do to diffuse and possibly dissolve, the impact of stereotypes and biases on the culture?
You know, this question, it kind of makes me laugh when we talk about dissolving something. I just had this vision of Alka-Seltzer in a glass because it dissolves, it fizzes and dissolves. It's kind of messy in the beginning. And it's very true if we want to diffuse and dissolve biases and stereotypes. Another word for bias and stereotypes is discrimination. And I think that's really important too. This is a pretty powerful uh, part of why DE&I, inclusion, belonging, why there have been some barriers to it. And so let me ask you, I want to just ask you all this question. Have you ever felt like the other? Have you ever felt like, nodding heads, yes. It, we've all felt like the other. We certainly have felt like the other. And that is really hard. It's like the other people have power, they have privilege, and they're deciding that we're not part of the us that they feel they're part of. So it's a them and us thinking. Um, and now let me reflect this a little bit differently. How do you see people who don't look like you, act like you, speak like you, think like you, move like you? And that's the reflective part that needs to be addressed, that we have to take into consideration. So stereotypes and biases we encounter them all the time in the disability sector. So we hear assumptions about competence, generalizations about people with any number of particular disabilities. For example, autistic people are really good at computers, which is such a gross overgeneralization. How about, the thinking would be, well, let's sit down with this person and have a conversation. What are they good at? What are they interested in? That's the kind of thinking that turning biases and discrimination and stereotypes on its head will come across. And there's also biases based on misinformation, long held assumptions, and in particular, deciding what kinds of supports and accommodations a person needs without asking them what works. You're part of this conversation. Big saying in the disability world, nothing about us without us. So I can, I just want to kind of give an example. When I first started my work here in Minneapolis in the Jewish community, uh, many years ago, I don't have to say how many, do I? Anyway, it was 20 some years ago, almost 21 years ago. The first thing that I did in my role as the inclusion coordinator for this brand new program designed to work with all the Jewish organizations in the community to help them find ways to support people with disabilities, to foster inclusion. I went to a committee meeting, and this was a committee meeting of all the powers that be from all the different organizations who had constructed this program, who had been really instrumental and involved in it. And I'm sitting there, and I'm a lifelong resident of Minneapolis, so I pretty much knew everybody. And I'm sitting at this meeting, and I'm looking around, and I'm going, there's something unusual about this group. There's someone missing from this group. And as people went around and introduced themselves, I realized, well, they're all allies of people with disabilities, but there are no people with disabilities here. So it came time for me to introduce myself, tell a little bit about myself. And I did. And I got to the very end of my introduction, and I said this. And I am a person who lives with a disability. Dead silence in the room. And then things went on and on and on with this meeting. Now, I was excited about my job, and I I felt that the job and I were sort of meant to be, and I was really excited for this job, to do this job. I'm kind of, I don't know if you know this about me, but I like to gin up things to change for the better. Um, so the next day, my supervisor called me into her office and she sat me down and she said, you know, yesterday when you made that comment that you have a disability, I thought that was really inappropriate. My first reaction, and I said this out loud, was, well, it's a damn good thing you hired me for this position. Can you imagine? There were no people with disabilities on this strategic planning committee. My supervisor, who was overseeing this program designed to support people with disabilities to live active and full lives in the community, telling me I was inappropriate because I said I had a disability. And all I could think of was, first thing I thought of was, I have a lot of work to do here. And the second thing I thought of was, okay, I might just have to quit. This is really hostile. And I feel like she just pounced on me. I even telling it, I kind of want to cry. Fortunately, things got better. But that's what is called, that is called microaggression. That is, it's everyday, kind of subtle, but intentional interactions on behaviors that communicate some sort of bias towards a historically marginalized group, people with disabilities. Now, I don't think my supervisors, who remains nameless to this day, I I don't think that she realized that what she said was very hurtful, really hurtful. Um, I took it totally as a criticism. So, you know, it made me think and it made me more aware. Obviously, things worked out because I did speak up. So, the only way to counter implicit bias, whether it's intentional or not, is to speak up. My story is about the gut punch of biases. We've all heard these things. You know, there's tokenism. If you've ever been the only, name that group, person in a room, you feel like you're a token person, that you're representing a whole class of people. And it's the other comment that we hear sometimes, people will say, well, I don't see color. And think about that for a minute. If you don't see, you know, just take in, observe a person's skin color or the what makes that person different than you, that's really discounting their lived experiences. And we're not going to create homogenous societies. That's not the point. The point is that we really have to work to overcome these barriers to being genuine and authentic in our work, in our lives. And yeah.
Shelly, this is, I think, a good point to ask you to talk now a little bit about this intersection of belonging and inclusion. I see your book
Mhm.
behind you, From Longing to Belonging. As we talked about, you've written and spoken, extensively about this idea of a culture of belonging.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, as you've explored this idea with different organizations, can you tell us about that resonance between inclusion and belonging? I think we're more familiar with the concept of inclusion.
Right. We are more familiar with inclusion. When I was writing the book, and it took me, I would say, about 7 or 8 years to be able to start writing about belonging because I knew that was what I wanted to talk about, but I needed to find a way to make it meaningful and operational so that, you know, it didn't become, oh, that's a nice idea. Of course, yeah, we want to belong. Now let's put in a ramp. And so that was kind of where things were at. The idea of belonging simply is this: it's part of being human, of Most people want to belong somewhere. They that we and we've all talked about being the other. We talked about that a little bit earlier. So um, let's talk about belonging and what makes you feel that you belong. So I'm going to just ask that question. Think about a place in your life, a group in your life, something that nourishes you, something where you contribute, something meaningful. What is it about that place that gives you a sense of belonging? Kind of think about that. And I'm I'm gonna guess when I do this live in workshops, which I guess I haven't done in over a year, but sometimes on Zoom, um, people will come up with ideas of things that make them feel that they belong. And it's all about, well, I know that I can ask for support if I need support. I know that I can go to this place and people know my name. How's that? People engage with me and I can engage with people, that even if there are obstacles to communication, for example, we find a way because it's important that every single person feels that they matter. That's what belonging is. It's feeling that we matter. And so th- and I talked about this briefly before, inclusion actually got to be a very watered down term for me. Oh, yes, we're inclusive. We have an inclusion committee in congregational speak. Oh, we have a service once a year. It's our inclusion service, and we invite people with disabilities to come to the inclusion service, to which, depending on the organization and the level of understanding that they had at that moment, my response was, can you tell me how this is an inclusion service and why there's just one a year? Do you think maybe the people coming to the inclusion service want to be able to come to services any other time of the year? How are you going to welcome them? How will you support them? How will you let them know when services are and let them know that they belong here? So, and other organizations were like, okay, you're not quite ready to hear that, and having an inclusion service is a huge, big first step. So it we learn as we go, but belonging is what everybody can relate to. And I think that's what we that's what inclusion is. In fact, belonging is the key to inclusion.
Thank you, Shelly. So, give us some practical actions for organizations. We know that organizations and folks here, and whether they're part of a faith based congregation or an organization, are in all different places. What are some ways to begin focusing on DE&I?
Okay. So DE&I, first of all, I think it takes in the whole idea of belonging. Belonging is a personal and individual outcome, and that's really important. And when we start looking at putting together a strategy for how to move forward, where do we even start? Where do we start? So, one of the ways to start this, of course, to start D and I think that we need initiatives, certainly. Um, Things do come together better when more people are involved. So, I would start actually um, with getting a group of people, if you're in an organization, at different parts of that organization. Number one. Number two, ensuring that people who are maybe not typically included, people who have lived experiences in the diversity world, are part of whatever initiative you do. So we would call it, I guess, an inclusion committee, task force, accessibility task force. Those are some of the names that have been used in the past. And you can call it whatever resonates in your organization. but it has to start with a purpose. And that purpose can be defined through policy. Okay, so it's not like saying, oh yeah, let's just throw the word diversity or the words diversity, equity, inclusion into our mission statement. Let's pop it on our vision statement. Let's put it in our vision statements. This goes much further than that because a real policy, some think of policies as punitive. I don't. I think of policies as a way to operationalize what you're going to be doing. Number one. Number two, there's accountability with a policy. So, and there's communication with the policy. So it really comes together. And then the policy keeps you on track. The one thing I want to caution is that don't create a checklist. Okay, we're DE&I. We have a policy and anybody can come here if they want to, and so on. Oh, we have one Black employee. We have one disabled employee. Check, 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 check. DE&I is not about a checkbox. It is substantial and it is about substance. So your policy becomes a living and breathing thing that can also be changed and adapted as time goes by. The one of the really most important things you can do is do an assessment of your organization. Just take a look and interview people who are working in the organization or people who are users of that organization. There's a list of, I'm going to just name some of the people. So again, we're speaking broadly because there's a lot of different organizations I know represented today on the webinar. But the key to this, of course, is to talk with the leadership, the senior leadership and middle management, and people at all levels of the organization should be part of this assessment. Customers, if you have customers or clients, you would talk to, if you sell products, if you're a company that has products, you talk to your vendors. If you talk to your board, if you have a board of trustees or a board of directors, you would talk to people in the community. Any organization is part of the community. So are there allies in the community? Because what you want to do is paint the picture. You want to paint the picture of where you are at the present moment and look for opportunities as well. And then from there, you can create this vision. So this is a vision. If DE&I were fully embedded in our work, in our organization, we'd be diverse, equitable, and inclusive. How would this vision become operational, and what are the outcomes? How would this organization change, and how would the people involved in our organization be affected if this were a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization where people really matter? One of the other parts of this also would be, and I don't know how many organizations represented are in a capacity to hire people for jobs, but and there's a whole lot of things to say about that. But in terms of employment, where are you looking for jobs? Where are you looking for employees? And are you taking advantage of all the different community resources out there to hire people who are skilled, talented, engaged? Are you advertising in the right places? And just so much, there's so much here to unpack. So I'm going to put that aside for another time. After you have your policy, you've done some serious assessments, and you have a vision, then you can create your plan. And that plan is, how do you build a culture that's inclusive? You start with input from all concerned. You get buy-in. Training is definitely involved. Reporting and data. How are you doing? What are you measuring? Are you engaging all the stakeholders, all the allies, all the individuals involved? And then you do another assessment after a certain length of time. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's less, could be more, and move forward from there. That second assessment tells you what you accomplished. and where you need to go next. So this is a lot of stuff. I didn't realize I knew
Shelly,
so much.
it's good. Listen, I'm going to invite you to take a breath. We have one more question I'm going to ask you, and then I want to bring you a comment or two that's come in from the chat.
Great.
So you've given us so much to think about, Shelly. I think you've been describing this, but just to ask you to articulate, what are some of the benefits? You know, we can hear, oh, it's going to take some work. We've got to expand our thinking. We got to pull some people together. We're going to go out of our comfort zone. But there clearly benefits to embarking on a journey of diversity and inclusion. Can you describe that a bit?
Yes. Can you imagine where an organization where people are there because they care, they're part of a community because they care, because they belong, because they're accepted. I'm using the terms they and their kind of pejoratively, but where a person feels that for organizations, um, there's been a lot of research and data on how having a diverse workforce really produces better profits, more engaged people, workers, less turnover, significantly less turnover. That's one aspect of it. But I think really, what really resonates, and this comes from my faith work too, my faith community work, is that people who want to be a part of something get to be a part of something. And it doesn't mean that the door is open. Yeah, come on in. We don't know what to do with you, but you're here. That's very disingenuous, in my opinion. But an organization that says, we want you here because you belong here, you belong to all of us, and we belong to each other. We're part of this purpose-driven organization or this company. We believe in it, and we want to be here. We want everybody who wants to be here, but we got to go beyond that. And we have to think and ask the questions. This is the biggest, most wonderful part of diversity, equity, inclusion. We get to sit down with each other, ask the questions. What's important to you? What do you care about? What are you good at? What do you want to participate in? How do you want to impact the culture of this organization? And how do you want to impact the purpose of this organization, the
Okay, thank
productivity of this
you.
organization? So those are just some really important questions. And I think, let's face it, when you have an organization of people just like yourself who want to belong, it's a richer organization. It's good for the soul, good for the heart, good for the mind. So yeah,
That's
thanks for the
awesome.
question.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to remind folks that if you have a question, we'll take a few minutes. You can put it in the chat. And Shelly, I want to read you this comment that very
Mhm.
delighted that my friend Rabbi Joan is on today. And she wrote that she is a rabbi who has multiple disabilities herself and has experienced much of what you're describing, Shelly, even as a rabbi. And she's talking about how COVID has opened many doors that weren't open before. And already she's seeing them starting to close to those who are disabled. She said, I was opening doors that, that everyone would learn from this experience of being isolated by COVID and having experienced some of how it's affected, for example, elderly members of one's family or community, and that we would develop more sensitivity from the isolation that we've all felt right from this pandemic year. And yet, I think what Rabbi Joan is experiencing, some of what I'm seeing too, that as we get into this period of returning, that we don't want to lose some of what we've discovered in terms of ways that belonging can be expanded.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi Joan, for that. It's, you know, I there's a part of me that just wants to go to these organizations and go, why would you change access? Why wouldn't you add access for people? Keep what's been working. And we know that the numbers of people who've been involved through Zoom, through other platforms where there are barriers, transportation, in typical times where the barriers exist, this has opened doors for so many people to belong and to be a part. And I want to add to this also is that just because a person participates on a platform like we're on right now does not mean they don't want to participate in other ways in the organization. So whether it's in person or not, it doesn't mean that that they don't want to be there, because how do you do this? How do you give somebody something so special and so important and so critical to their lives and then take it away? So those would be the question. That would be the question. Whoever those powers that be are, I would um, raise their level of understanding and information about the positive impact. And chance, we know organizations kind of oftentimes will default. Well, it's expensive. We can't afford to do this. It's like, come on, you've been doing this. You've been doing this. So why would you not keep it going? So those are, you know, there's a lot of challenging that goes on in this world, in this work, because we have been able to see so much progress during this year in terms of engagement, in terms of participation. Why would we go back?
Shelley, thank you. That
So,
was a great answer. And, again, I think all of us here can be those advocates and keep reminding, whether it's a church, synagogue, mosque, workplace, community organization, whoever it is, that, we want to keep a lot of these inclusive features that we've discovered during the pandemic year. So thank you, Rabbi Joan, for raising that up. Shelly, we want to let's get our slides up, because I know that
okay.
some people may want to connect with you in terms of thinking about their organization and a strategic approach to DE and I. And there is Shelly, and we want to get your contact info.
Yes.
There we go. So Shelly's
Okay.
at Shelly at inclusioninnovations.com, and that is your website, inclusioninnovations.com. Um,
Yes. If you want to reach me, don't go through the website. Just go to my email address.
Shelly, and
The
I'll,
website's
I'll
a little wonky.
I'll put it in the chat too in just a sec. So why don't you go back, and we'll tell everyone this has been Shelly. I just feel like you have shared so much information and so much truly for us to think about, to take back. So thank you. And we're
You're
gonna
welcome.
we're gonna continue this conversation in all different ways through the summer. Our next Everyone's Welcome is going to be with Denise Resnick, who's the founder and president and CEO at First Place Phoenix. It's going to be a great conversation. Just to tell you a little bit about Denise, a native Phoenician and international leader in autism, Denise has raised community awareness and more than $75 million for autism, primarily from sources in Arizona. And that supportive community inspired PBS NewsHour to produce a two-part nationally broadcast series citing Phoenix as the most autism-friendly city in the world. Backed by more than 20 years of research, support from the Urban Land Institute, and more than 100 collaborators from the public, private, philanthropic, and nonprofit sectors, First Place Arizona, which Denise has founded, is positioned for transformational impact on how society approaches housing and community development for individuals with autism and other neurodiversities. So come join us. We will be sending out the registration information soon. You want to learn with Denise. And Shelly, let's go to the next slide if you want some more learning with
Voila.
Shelly and me. First of all, yes, we got our book up that we produced at Jewish Learning Venture. It's on sale right now through May 31st. And whether you're Jewish or not, it's a very helpful tool to teaching young kids about this conversation about the value of inclusion. So check out In My Kahila. And Shelly and my books, there's From Longing to Belonging, which we talked about, and my book, The Little Gatecrasher, which is a memoir of my great uncle's story. They're available at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kindle, Kindle Unlimited, Target, wherever you're buying books these days. So, Shelly, we promise that we will notify people who registered for this webinar when the recording's available and up at jkidaccess.org, where you can find the entire archives. And we really want to thank you, Shelly, for sharing your wisdom with us today, and also thank
Oh, my
everybody
pleasure.
for being here. Any final, I feel like this was such a momentous conversation. Feel free to share any final thoughts in the chat as we're headed out for the rest of our day, and do get in touch with Shelly to continue this conversation.
Yes. And I encourage you just to, you know, there was a lot of information today. Take little snippets, little something that resonated, and just kind of chew on that for a while. Um, I think, I think one of the reasons that I got so interested in this movement of DE&I was because it's finally emerged into the more of the public arena, the public sector. So a lot of what we're doing, a lot of what those of us in faith community and people who in organizations that have DE&I initiatives are finally seeing progress, and it's like let's move it forward. Let's do all we can to move this forward so that anybody who wants to be there is there and valued. And we talk about being our authentic selves. And if you've ever been a place where you feel you can just be you, isn't that the best?
Mm. Shelly,
So
someone just asked, do you want to just put your email in the chat?
sure.
Let me make sure that we've got that right in the chat for everybody. And once again, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be together next on June 22nd, and we look for just a summer of connecting with you. Look forward to it.